All right, hello everyone, and thank you for joining us for Black Minds Matter. My name is Luke Wood, and I'm a professor at San Diego State University. And tonight we have several special guests for you. The first guest will be Shabazz, who is an educational advocate and the daughter of Dr. Betty Shabazz and Malcolm X. We will also have Chance Lewis, who is a distinguished professor and prolific scholar. We will then conclude with a video recording that will come from Jawanza Kunjufu with the interview that we conducted with him. So thank you for joining us. We're looking forward to the conversation, and let's begin. So as always, we'd like to begin by thanking our sponsors and those who helped us to put on the course. They include several organizations, including the Education Trust West, the Campaign for Black Male Achievement, MOB, Moms of Black Boys United, San Diego State University's Instructional Technology Services, which allows us to use the Lightboard, Our Scholarship Matters, which is doing a sale this week for the apparel they've been putting together that's focused on advocating for Black Minds Matter as well as other issues, and the Center for Organizational Responsibility and Advancement, which does training programs focused on preparing educators to work with Black boys and men in education. And then lastly, before we go to the speakers, I'm going to do just a very short conversation on the last D in the D3 effect. So if you remember, we've talked about 3 different types of ways that Black boys and men are viewed in school. The first is distrust, which really deals with how they are viewed in a criminalized fashion. We talked about disregard, where we basically disregard their academic capabilities, and we've talked about that through the lens of an description of intelligence. And then lastly, we want to talk about disdain, which views the ways that we look at the students, their families, and their communities through a very deficit-oriented lens. Now, this is really a combination of 2 different microaggression areas into one. One being what's referred to as a second-class citizen, so being viewed as a person whose group is lesser than others. But we also see that this converges with another type of microaggression, which is called pathologizing culture, or where we pathologize the cultural values and communication styles. And really what we're looking at here is the cultural values. So here is the definition of this from Dr. Daryl Wing Su, who is one of the primary scholars in the field of microaggression. Says a pathologizing culture is the notion that the values and communication styles of the dominant white culture are ideal. And just in some of the things that myself and my colleague, Dr. Harris, have done through our work with SEAL, the center that we run here at San Diego State, here are some of the quotes that we've elicited from our research, where people have really kind of alluded to statements that really pathologize culture in negative ways. So statements such as, they are lazy, referring to Black males. They don't care. Or if they're in school, they're only really here for the financial aid. They come from bad communities. They come from fatherless homes. Their communities are low income, which oftentimes serves as a code word for viewing them in a very ghettoized fashion, referring to their communities as the hood, which was an example that we provided last week in one of the quotes that came from a parent about how they were viewed by their teacher. They have just too many problems. They suffer from generational poverty. Their parents value sports over school. They have unstructured home environments. They don't know how to invest in education. Their parents simply won't get involved. They're not here for school, just for socializing. They are unable to see a future for themselves. They're not exposed to good role models and mentors. And so the importance here is these are very common statements that are made about our Black boys and men. And for those of us who work in any setting in education, whether it's a school, college, or university, you've probably heard other individuals say these types of things as kind of these broad statements about our boys and men of color. And so when we're talking about these notions of pathologizing culture in the work that we do, it's where we paint this kind of broad strokes that have this very deficit underlying view of our communities of color. So broad statements about Black boys and men that focus on perceived inadequacies in their communities, that assume a lack of commitment to learning. And one of my colleagues, Dr. Lawson Bush, who is at CSU LA, one of the things that he says is it's not that Black males dislike schooling or education, they dislike schooling, which is really the practice about how we enact our relationships and interactions with them. Instead, what he says is they yearn to learn, but they don't yearn to be in environments where they're treated with disdain and disrespect. Where we disparage their families and their familial structures, we portray them as unable to overcome societal challenges, or we suggest that barriers to the school, their success in school are simply just insurmountable. And this can even be where we might view them as a individual who cares and is worthy, but even if they tried their hardest, everything that they have in their life would just prevent them from being able to be successful. So these are ways in which we pathologize their culture. So what I want to talk about is just some strategies and practices that serve to build relationships with students, because we haven't really talked enough about relationship building. And especially since this session here is going to be focused more so on practices, particularly with the talk that we'll be giving by Dr. Chance Lewis, I thought it was important to talk about relationships, because remember what we said earlier, relationships are a foundational precondition to effective teaching and learning, counseling, advising, or any support practice for this population. You simply will not be as effective as you could be with them if you don't have a relationship with them, because those relationships can be used to essentially leverage their assets and to improve the teaching and learning enterprise for them. So just some quick recommendations. These might even seem like really simple things, but oftentimes what we don't do are the things that are simple. So just going over some things that we've talked about, and this comes from 3 different guidebooks that I've done with my colleague, Dr. Harris, and one that we did also with the colleague, Khalid White, which are Teaching Boys and Men of Color, Teaching Men of Color in the Community College, and Supporting Men of Color in the Community College. And in all those books, we talked about what are some strategies, simple things for building relationships with this population. So number 1, low-hanging fruit, know their name. Educators must learn students' names and refer to them by name when addressing them. So it's important that we not only know their name, right, but we refer to their name and use their name when we talk about them, because this is a way that we can demonstrate our care towards them by simply just knowing who they are. It demonstrates our interest in them and what they want to do and what they want to accomplish. So what we say in that book is it's a powerful way of conveying that their presence and personhood is important. Now, a couple of years ago, I was at a college and I won't say where, I was at a college and I was talking to some faculty members about the importance of knowing their name. And one faculty member raised his hand and he said, well, yeah, but do you realize how many students I have in my class? I can't simply learn everyone's name. And this was a response from another colleague who was in the audience, which I think helps to demonstrate the importance of doing this. And this is what they said. Educators constantly challenge students to learn information that they may struggle with. Teachers speak with an argot of academic lingo specific to their discipline, communicate new concepts and theories, and constantly require students to push themselves in their learning and development. Any educator who downplays the importance of saying a student's name correctly does so from a standpoint of privilege that their students rarely have. So again, just talking about the importance of knowing students' names. Now, some might say, well, this seems like a recommendation that's really more so geared for higher education, where you might have a class of 30 people ranging up to 300 people for one section. But here's an example of the importance of this that comes from a study that was done by a colleague, Quaylen Allen, which looks more so at K-12. And this is just a quote that a student had. He says, "She doesn't know my name," referring to his teacher. "Just the other day, we were having a test review game and she was throwing popsicle sticks out of a cup. And I'm like, you know, I'm the only Black kid in your class, next to 3 other Black kids in there," referring to the school. "And I'm like one of the goofiest ones in there. And so she pulls my name out and she goes, Daryl?" And it's her own handwriting and everything. And I'm like, come on, lady. I've been in your class now for about 4 months now, and you don't know my name? She doesn't know me or anything like that. So it's just the importance of demonstrating care by knowing students' names and then referring to them by name. Now, one recommendation that I oftentimes provide educators is start out with those students, if you have a really large class, start out with those students who typically experience disproportionate impact. Those students who, based upon your prior experience teaching that class, may not perform as well based upon a confluence of factors that might be related to their schools, the families, communities, what you're doing in the classroom, institutional structures, and a litany of other factors, right? Start out with them and treat it like any other triage approach. Start with them and then move forward and then learning other names from other individuals from there. Next, be intrusive with relationships. Be proactive in building relationships with students. Again, relationships that are typified by trust, mutual respect, and authentic care. Learn about students with interest. When you're being engaged with them and you're talking with them, be truly interested in what they're saying to you about themselves, right? That's a way of demonstrating our care and building relationships. Prioritize out-of-class interactions with them. We talked about in a prior session how in a study that we did with Black men in a community college setting, how they would see their faculty members outside of the classroom and their faculty members, when they would see them, would walk the other direction, put their head down, pretend to get on the phone to avoid having interactions with them. Instead, make sure that you're being proactive about engaging them and then, of course, doing so with interest. Also, another thing is to avoid what we call an approach me first or prove yourself first stance. One of the things that we oftentimes hear when we do interviews with Black men in community colleges is that their faculty members don't necessarily invest time in them unless they show themselves approved already. So as a faculty member, for example, let's say you have tons of students who are in your class. Well, a common thing that you might do is then restrict your involvement to those who are seemingly the most engaged, the students who are asking questions, responding to questions, the students who are engaging with you the most, right? It's a natural thing to do. So what we recommend doing is as you think about that, recognize that then there are certain students who are going to be less likely to engage with you based upon a number of reasons. And we talked about an apprehension to engage. So what happens is if a student is apprehensive to engage because they're worried about how they're going to be perceived, and then on the flip side, a faculty member is like, well, I'm only going to invest in those students who prove themselves first, the two groups never meet in the middle. So we want you to avoid an approach me first or prove yourself first stance. Engage in regular check-ins and be attentive to warning signs. Here's the thing. Oftentimes we can see students' body language where they're starting to withdraw, they're starting to not participate as much. You know what? It's a lot harder to get a student to come back after they've made the decision to leave than to prevent that from happening by engaging with them when you start to recognize warning signs. Next thing, and I gotta admit, this one's tough for me, but be fully present when you're communicating and having conversations with students, right? This is one I really need to work on. All my students in here probably are shaking their heads right now. But maintain attentional focus when you're engaged in one-on-one interactions with Black males. Here's the thing. Our lives as educators are very full. We have so many things on our plates. We're juggling so many balls, and we're oftentimes multitasking. But we have to remember that when we're talking about our Black males, they oftentimes either feel that they're being surveilled or that they're invisible. And if we don't want them to feel invisible, it's important for us to then take the time and truly engage with them. It's better for us to have a few minutes with them where we're totally present in that conversation than to have a longer period of time where we're distracted and not fully engaged with them. So again, this is one that I need to work on. Appropriate disclosing. Disclosing of personal information that allowed you to build rapport with students. Here's what we know. With students, oftentimes when they see an educator, they see a finished product. They see a person who is at the end possibly of their educational journey, a person who's possibly dressed nice in the front of the classroom, who's very articulate, who has all kinds of different degrees. They see a finished product and they don't necessarily recognize the struggles and challenges that we had to go through to get to the places that we're at. So in one of our studies, it was said that teachers noted that being vulnerable in front of them, referring to Black males, allowed for students to feel more comfortable being vulnerable with them as well. So it was reciprocal. So this was seen as a critical pathway for fostering authentic conversations as well as trust. So what we talk about is the importance of appropriate disclosing. Appropriately disclosing personal challenges that you've encountered and that you've overcome. Why is that important? Because what that does is it allows the student to see you as another human being. It makes you seem like something that's more attainable, that's down to earth, and it bridges that divide that oftentimes prevents communication and relationship stability between faculty and students. It can also serve as a source of inspiration. You know, if I talk about some challenges I've overcome and they can see something that I'm doing that's very positive and productive, it serves it as an example of something that they can do. Now, asterisks to all of this, you can never do this and make statements of equivalency. So you should never say to a student, hey, I know what it's like to be you because I've overcome this challenge. That doesn't work. That actually backfires. Instead, just make the statement as it is. This is something that I've experienced and this is something that I've overcome, right? And allow the students to elicit from it the information and connections that they want to. It can be very inspirational to them. And then lastly, before we go to our guest speakers, actually two more, connect with people, not services. So, and this is one that I think really applies to community colleges and higher education institutions, but I think there's also some applicability for K-12. But we have to recognize that when we refer students to different resources or people, that every time they have to go and engage with that person, it's another instance of help seeking. And as we learned from Dr. Harris in his talk with us, many men of color are apprehensive about seeking out help because they're worried about one, being seen as weak or inferior from a gendered standpoint, but then from a racial standpoint, what are they worried about? They're worried about reifying stereotypes that they're not able to be there, that they can't perform at that level. So if we're saying, hey, we know these resources that are out there that are available for students that are important, and so what we do, we put them in our syllabus, we put them in course announcements, we tell students, hey, go to this service that we are aware of, or we give them referral slips, that's simply not enough because every time they have to go and use that, it's oftentimes an instance of help seeking, but they also can have bad interactions at those places. So what we believe is important is to facilitate direct connections with colleagues whom you trust. If you're working with a student and you know, for example, that they need to go to financial aid or they need to go see a counselor, or they need to do this, walk them to that place if you can. Go with them hand in hand. Or if they're in your office, pick up the phone, call them, be like, hey, I'm here with this student right now. We're having a conversation about this. They are in need of this. I'm going to send them over to you right now. Will you be there to receive them? So that the student knows that somebody's waiting on them, so they'll be more likely to go and get that support. Or at the very least, if you can't go with them and you can't make a phone call, recommend them to go to whatever that service is and recommend them for a very specific person to go see. And then say, hey, I want to talk to you tomorrow about what happens, so that they know that you're waiting to follow up with them so that they know they need to go. But it's important to connect them with a person when you do that, not just a service. Don't say go to financial aid, say go to Amy. Don't say go to counseling services, say go meet Sam. Why is that important? Because not everyone in your institution or on your campus is going to care about them and be committed to them the same way that you will be. Everyone has different commitments. So what you want to do is connect them with people who you know will care about them and support them in the same way that you do. This is important because it helps you to then transfer rapport to that person, and then that person can then transfer rapport to other people who they recommend, right? Because the worst thing you can do is to recommend a student to go, oh, I just say go to financial aid. They go to financial aid, they have a bad experience, and then now they're like, well, why did I listen to them? I had a bad experience. I don't want to listen to their recommendations. So if you can connect them with people who you know will advocate for them, it'll be very important so that you can help build them a network of support for them to be more successful. But you're also at the same time reducing the instances where they have to go out and seek out help. Lastly, I believe, and this is just more so from observation and anecdote than it has been as much from the research that we've done. So I want to delineate that from some of the other statements that I've made. But I think summative symbols can be a very important way that we can demonstrate care and connection to a student. Summative symbols are something that are material in nature that we give to a student as a way of demonstrating our personal commitment to that individual. And I would like to provide you with some examples of what that looks like, of things that we can do. But I want to first say that it doesn't have to be something that is a high monetary value. Symbolism can be something that's very important, something that they can hold on to tangibly and remind themselves why they're doing. It can serve as to motivate them towards their goals, to have a harder work ethic, and to be more resilient. So just a quick anecdote. When I started my doctoral program, I had a faculty member, his name is Carlos Navarez, who's one of my closest mentors. And one of the things that we had was essentially a bet about how long it would take me to complete my doctorate. He had completed his in a very short amount of time in terms of achieving his PhD, and not just completing it, but also then being productive and publishing and presenting, right? And we had a bet about the time frame that he had and the time frame that I would have. And we made a small monetary bet. It was like $1, right? For how much, if I could beat his record or whatever it was, right? It was really about just motivating me to be successful. Well, I did end up beating that record by a very, very, very thin margin. And he gave me the dollar, right? And I keep that dollar on me everywhere I go. It's in my wallet. I keep it on me because it reminds me, right, to stay focused. And it's just a symbolic thing. I mean, it's a monetary value. A dollar, I mean, obviously isn't that much, but it means it is worth much more than that to me. Here's another example. Then this is from a student who a faculty member gave them a book that served as a source of inspiration for them. And this was a student who was getting ready to drop out of college because they couldn't afford the textbook, okay? They couldn't afford the textbook. They were falling behind in the class, and this is their interaction with their faculty member. He said, she saw that I couldn't get the textbook, so she gave me hers. I was like, man, this is amazing. For her to do that for me, it just really showed she really cares. And I tried to give it back to her at the end of the semester and say, like, thank you. And she wouldn't take it. She said, keep the book. She said, if you want it, keep it. If not, you can pay it forward. But I needed the book so much, it was helping me with writing, teaching me how to cite and grammar. And so I kept the book as a reference. I still have it. I keep it in my room where I study. I see it every day. And I keep it there to use it, but also because it motivates me. It reminds me when I almost quit and how she helped me when she didn't have to. All right, here's another one. And this comes from actually my dissertation study of a student who was in high school. He wanted to go and become a chef, and there was a culinary program in his high school. And one of his teachers gave him a coat, but told him, a chef's coat, but told him he couldn't wear it until he finished, until he graduated, right? And so this is a quote from that student. He says, where do I see myself 10 years from now? Honestly, I mean, I can't really tell what the future holds, but I want to see myself in somebody's restaurant cooking some great dishes for people to eat. People telling me, yeah, you cook real good. Me wearing my chef's coat, that's what I really want to do. I just really want to wear my chef coat. I mean, honestly, the only thing I just really hope for right now is just getting to wear my chef coat. I have a chef coat at home sitting in my closet, sitting there collecting dust. My high school teacher gave it to me. I have this little jacket in the closet, and I just really want to wear that because once I wear that, once I have that on, and I'm in somebody's kitchen and I have that on, then I can tell myself, and then I can actually tell myself I made it. So just another example of very simple things we can do that can be very meaningful and motivational. Okay, so with that, we're going to go ahead and transition to our guest speakers. And we have, again, just some wonderful individuals who will be joining us. And the first person who will be joining us is Shabazz, who is the third daughter of Malcolm X and Dr. Betty Shabazz, and is an educator, activist, motivational speaker, and award-winning author of numerous books, including a coming-of-age memoir entitled Growing Up X, which I have a copy of, a children's illustration book entitled Malcolm Little, the Boy Who Grew Up to Become Malcolm X, and a young adult historical fiction book entitled X, a novel. Ilyasa promotes higher education for at-risk youth, interfaith dialogue to build bridges between cultures for young leaders of the world, and she participates on international humanitarian delegations. Ilyasa, thank you so much for joining us. We truly appreciate your time.
It's an honor for me to be here. I'm learning, so I'm really happy to join. And I think it's really great that you have students that so this is an actual class, correct?
Yes, the students who are here in class. And we have students who are joining us virtually.
I think it's really fantastic, and your students are very fortunate to have you.
Oh, well,
curriculum.
Thank you. And thank you for joining us. So some of the folks who are watching may not know that we actually had the privilege of hosting you at San Diego State not that long ago, when you were here on campus and you spoke about your upbringing, and you spoke about your father and about your work. And so there's so much to cover, but tonight we'll be focused more upon some other issues. But to just kind of orient some people, can you tell us about yourself and the advocacy work that you've been engaged in education?
Yeah, gosh. Well, let's see. So I am a professor at John Jay College of Criminal Justice presently. For as long as I can remember, I've always mentored younger people. When I was in high school, I mentored at this place, Children's Village, and it was a lockup facility for children, because I realized that there were many children who did not have a good sense of who they were. And I felt so fortunate to have had parents who loved me and who had given me all of these, like they really invested in my identity. And so all of this mentoring, so to speak, became, things that they actually just things that I really enjoyed and I felt very committed to doing. So education, now I am, as I said, teaching at John Jay, but I lecture, throughout the year. I do so many different things to educate young people to the power, to their identity, to so many kinds of things.
Yes, and as part of that, one of the pleasures of having you when you were here at San Diego State is that you talked about your family and your upbringing and how that has kind of guided the work that you do. Is there anything that you might want to mention about that in terms of how your family has influenced the work that you're currently doing?
Well, one of the things, my mother always talked about how much her husband loved his people. And, he obviously gave his life for his people. He gave his life for the advancement of our human rights, of our identity, of making sure that history properly preserved our history, that all of these different things. My mother really instilled in us everything to encourage self-love. And so what I see today is that before you can love other people and do the work genuinely, you have to love yourself and understand that, that people are a reflection of who you are. I love myself. I'm so grateful that my mother gave me, the things that were necessary for me to have this self-love as a woman, as a person of the diaspora, as a Muslim. And because of the love that I have for myself, it's so easy for me to look into an audience and tell people, young people, how much I love them. It's very easy for me to do this work because of that love, and also understanding the injustice and also understanding the miseducation, just all of these things. I'm grateful to both of my parents for making sure that I understood where I fit in a global, from a global perspective, where I fit as a human being. When my human rights are violated, someone else's are as well. And my responsibility to address those injustices, if I know about it, and not turn my back. So I'm grateful for those things because of my parents.
Yes, absolutely. And so one of the things I wanted to ask you is in terms of your perspective, what do you see as some of the larger issues facing the Black community today? And how does this influence the lives and education of Black boys and men?
Okay, so let's go with the first question, because I'm, if you remember, I'm all over the place. But so your first question?
So what do you see as some of the larger issues facing the Black community today?
Some of the larger issues facing us, well, one of the main issues is the misinformation regarding us, understanding our history, understanding that journey, that we were refined and industrious citizens, thriving civilizations at its peak, the most thriving civilizations, the first libraries, the first schools, that people around the world would come to the continent to learn, would come to the continent to learn from Black African scholars, that these individuals were taken and enslaved. And that had it not been for these refined and industrious enslaved African people, that we would not have the privilege of calling the United States of America, the land of milk and honey, our home. And so I think when we understand and can see ourselves in the positive light, and it's not fiction, but fiction, not true, that these are the facts. And when we understand the facts, whenever we see historical interpretations of, the ancient lands, it's usually people in Africa with British accents. We don't see Black people, we don't see, there's just so much misinformation. So I think at the top of all of this is making sure that young children are able to see themselves in these stories. When we're in church, that we're able to see ourselves in these stories. When we're in school, learning about things that are progressive and productive, that we can see ourselves in this equation. And it's not being untrue, it's the actual facts. But for some reason, whenever we're taught about anything, Africa and people of color, Black people, are taken out of that equation. And so, I think it's just something that is extremely, it's such a disservice to any child.
Absolutely. And I think that also ties in terms of how we're educated about ourselves as well, right?
Absolutely.
To not be in the curriculum, to not be in the books, the characters. So, and you're an educator. So what do you see as some of the primary challenges facing our Black students in general, but maybe even in particular, Black boys and men?
Well, I think it's important to understand one's identity, that it's important, especially when you look at the history, when we understand the beginning of civilization, the beginning of, like a lot of us are surprised to find when they say that there were people going to space long ago, that Africans made so many accomplishments. We did not want to identify with anything Black. We don't want to identify with Africa. So it says that we have to control the images that are being portrayed. Sometimes we sit back and we make these complaints. We complain that the educational curriculum is not inclusive. It's not accurate. It doesn't, tell the truth. I never learned about Malcolm X. I never learned that the Black Egyptians who built these pyramids were Black. I never learned about the, Timbuktu. I never learned about all of these different things. And so what it says is that we have to take responsibility to right the wrongs in our society, that we can't just sit back and talk about the injustices. We have to be willing to address these injustices. And this is what seems like is happening more so today with young people, that they are taking responsibility and they understand the power that they have to change things. When Nike said, just do it, we have to really do that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, and we've seen this, right? In terms of, you said young people who are engaged in collective action around a lot of these issues. And we know that in recent years, there's been many high profile shootings of young Black men. How do you think that the struggle in context of that for racial justice in this country has changed or evolved? Is it the same struggle that it's always been, just different time period, or you think that it's been changing?
No, I don't think it's been changing. I think it's what it's always been. And, if we recall, maybe 15 years ago, before we had smartphones, if anyone spoke about racism, prejudice, injustice, we would all, we often would get that response, slavery ended a long time ago,
Yeah.
There's nothing going on now. You have equal rights. Look at Oprah Winfrey, look at Michael Jackson, look at, all the successful individuals that we saw. But we didn't realize that, as Michelle, now I can't think of her name, the attorney who wrote the book about, we didn't realize there were 300,000. What did you say?
Is it Michelle Alexander?
Yes, Michelle Alexander. That there were 300,000 young people of color behind bars. And during this whole time that we were thinking that everything was okay, that the number quickly rose to 2.3 2.6 million young people behind bars, a lot of them who did not commit crimes, or in bad circumstance. And so I think that the times are still just as they were 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 50 years ago, 100 years ago. And I think it's very unfortunate, obviously, but no, I don't think that a lot has changed, but I believe that it will begin to change, because now that we have a president where we can clearly see the writing on the wall, it's causing many of us to come together and have that discussion and figure out, what do we do next? How are we going to go about making changes? How are we going to hold our elected officials accountable? What is our role? What is our responsibility to make change? And so, look, now we can salute Kaepernick. We can salute all of those who are being responsible young people and who's taking advantage of the platform that they have, who's utilizing, the platform that they have.
Absolutely. And so let's think about that in context of education. What can people be doing to better improve the outcomes that we see for our Black boys and men, and for our Black students in general?
Write books, make sure that the educational curriculum is inclusive, that it doesn't make sense that we would want to celebrate who we are in 28 days when we can do it throughout the educational year, the school year. I mean, what kind of sense does that make? And how do we just sit back and just accept that we're going to celebrate ourselves for 28 days? Well, what does that say? That says Black lives don't matter. That says I don't even respect you, but I'm going to give you 28 days to, keep you satisfied over here. We have to make sure that we understand the importance and the significance of our history, that it's included in the American educational curriculum throughout the entire year.
Absolutely. The classroom is snapping. So what I wanted to do is actually transition to some of the questions that are coming in we have students again who are in the physical class, and then students who are watching virtually, and they're using the hashtag Black Minds Matter. And so we're looking at that. And this question's, and feel free to pass on any of these questions too, if you feel like they're too personal. It says, what have you, or do you do with the anger that you might feel as a result of what's happened to your family? How do you handle that anger?
Well, whenever I find myself in a challenging space, I think about all of those who were enslaved, all those beautiful human beings, young and old, man, woman, child, who were enslaved and endured psychological trauma day in and day out. I think of all of those bodies that were lynched for no reason at all. I mean, we can see bigots, we can see bullies, and just imagine that people have the opportunity to carry out any kind of crime that they want against your humanity with having no protection. So I think about my ancestors. I think about anyone that's endured any kind of psychological trauma, physical harm, hardship, and anything that I'm feeling is by no means any comparison. So I don't like to harbor negativity, because it gives off things that aren't so healthy inside of ourselves. For me, it's so much more important to do the work, to somewhat isolate myself so I can do whatever work is necessary to make sure that I make some kind of contribution before I pass away, as we eventually will, each of us. And I also understand that it's not my responsibility any more than it is the next person's, because I used to really have a big challenge with that when I was in college. I thought that, oh my gosh, I have all this stuff that I have to do to live up to my father. And but then I realized that just as it was not his responsibility, it was something that he accepted, and what a burden for such a young man who's only in his 20s when the world learned of him, and 39 when he's killed, and to have made such an enormous sacrifice and a significant impact.
Absolutely. Here's the next question. It says, can you please share your experience? And this is from a student in the class, Hosna Sadat. Says, please share your experience as a Black Muslim educated woman in America. Can you talk about the intersection of those identities and how it's influenced your experience?
Well, I'm fortunate and grateful that I've been able to travel the world and see how other people, the truth, for instance, going to the Middle East and hearing how dangerous it is and getting there and then seeing how peaceful and beautiful it is. Going to Africa and the image, shown of something else, and then going there and seeing all of these educated, progressive people with a beautiful land, and understanding the people that are over there giving this negative information to keep us divided and conquered and all these other things. So I'm grateful. I love me. I love all of me. I love my womanhood, my femininity. I love my Blackness, my Africanness, everything, my ancestors. I understand, the challenges. I understand the glory that there's so much of that. My religion has carried me through, the challenges. So I'm grateful, for all of who I am. And primarily because, I'm so grateful that my parents were who they are, the individuals. I wrote these books not because they are Malcolm X or Betty, but I have to take a step back and look at the individuals, look at who Malcolm is, look at who Betty is. And so I am grateful to have had that tutelage, that role model in my life. And so I'm able to live my life, like I said, loving me, loving people, and being able to make a contribution and not feel, not feel that people are judges, but it's God. And so that means that you live your life more meaningful, more purpose-driven, and so forth.
Yeah, absolutely. And so this question comes from one of the students in the class, and the question deals with this. You recommended, hey, we have to be able to have books and stories where we basically be able to see ourselves in that equation. And as an author, I mean, you've done this and you've contributed to this. But what they wanted to know is, how do you combat the kind of all lives matter talk and trying to create literature for Black children when the argument is, well, books should not be written for just Black boys?
Well, you see, there are no other books, right? When white people or any other group of individuals write books, right? They're not writing books for us. Nobody's putting us in a positive light, and I don't expect anyone to. I take responsibility for me and what I'm doing, and I really am not concerned with being criticized by someone who wants to now say, well, all lives matter, or, all that doesn't really matter to me. And I don't let that influence me and my work and my commitment. And, I just don't, allow that space into my own.
Totally understand that. And it's interesting because with this course, there has been some people who have not been super happy about it, who the response has been for Black Minds Matter, well, all minds matter. And it's kind of that same narrative that keeps on playing out. And I think it's just a clear misunderstanding of what we are trying to do and accomplish. Extolling the importance of one thing doesn't mean that something else is less important. It just means that thing is important in a world that treats it as if it's lesser than and it doesn't matter.
And that's right. And the thing is that we want a productive, progressive nation. So if we're denying many people in this beautiful country of diversity, the world's largest, the melting pot of the world's nationalities, we have that right here in this country. So, but right now, I believe we're number 26 in education, in our students being educated. And so we want all children to flourish. And if we don't have a good understanding or any kind of a positive curriculum on people of color, then it means that we have to do something about it to change this trajectory. And if other people don't think it's important, then the ones who do think it's important should continue to do that work.
Absolutely. If we can do just one, maybe two last questions for you. So this one comes from a student in the public course named Kyle. He says, with all of these issues that are taking place today, do you feel that history is beginning to repeat itself?
Absolutely. I think not until we address these issues and we're honest about them, like being honest about Africa, the civilization began there, right? Honest about slavery, have that discussion. When people understand who African people really are and the significant contributions that they made to world history, then there's a sense of respect, self-respect, respect for others. We get to see each nationality, all of the contributions, for instance, that the indigenous people of this country, the indigenous people of different countries made, instead of one group of people who just happen to be in every single part of the world, taking every single person's history and every single person's contributions. You mean other people didn't make any contributions before you came along? So I think it's important to be honest. It's important to properly educate our children and not be a nation and world of miseducated individuals with this false sense of superiority and this false sense of inferiority. We're all the same. Why should somebody, want to feel that they are superior over someone else?
Yeah, absolutely. Lastly, any parting words that you might have because we have different communities who are watching. So we have parent advocates and we have educators are kind of the two major groups that are participating. So any disclosing thoughts that you would like to recommend, particularly for the parents, in terms of how can they best advocate for their sons, recognizing that they're traversing systems that are very difficult and it's arduous work. It's painful to see the pattern play out with their own child. Any recommendation that you would give to them?
Well, I think that there's power in that village, and I think it's important that we recognize other individuals and align ourselves with them, with like-minded people. If there's something that you don't understand, then you want to find someone who is more educated on in a particular area without feeling inferior. We're all students learning. No one is better than us. Don't feel ashamed. For me, it's very important for my students to understand the power that they have, to understand what they bring to the table, that each one of us brings something to the table. And so if there's something that you don't know, go and find out. Go look for the support. Align yourself with other people. There's strength in numbers. We can't do these things, individually. There's that thing, you pull your own self up by your bootstrap. But if you look around, that doesn't work. We need that village to raise our children. So I think it's important that we, all of our children, yes, are important. Each of us want our children to be educated, to understand that they're worthy of love, worthy of a quality education so that they can participate in mainstream society. And so it's our responsibility as forward-thinking, civilized adults, smart, all of those things, to make sure that we are taking responsibility for our children. And so whatever it takes to do that, a class like yours, an individual like you, I can imagine all of the individuals who are in their seats, the students who are learning, there are always other people that we should find, look for, and do the work, have a plan, have measurable outcomes, measurable goals, like my father. My father did not do anything without having a goal at the end of whatever it is he was doing. He didn't just march. He didn't just demonstrate. Actually, he really didn't march, but he didn't march. He wouldn't do these things unless there was a measurable outcome. And he wanted to make sure that he accomplished his goals. He was a goal-oriented, problem-solving individual.
Yes, and I remember when you were here, that was something that I really took away from that conversation, because oftentimes we can engage in these different forms of direct action, but it might not produce the desired goal that we have. But ultimately, if we have to get to that end point, or else it was all for naught, right?
That's right.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us. You have been truly gracious with your time. You're insightful, and we really appreciate your time and for coming to join the students in Black Minds Matter.
I'm honored. I'm honored. I'm really honored. Next time you're going to look up and you're going to see me in your audience. You're definitely the truth. You're incredible. Yes, absolutely. And admire your willingness to serve younger people, to make sure that they're educated. Yet no, we don't have all of the answers, but it's good to be around those good minds, people who are trying to learn and looking for answers and direction and solutions and all of that stuff. So I definitely salute you.
Well, thank you. And it's a lot of people who put this on. So, collectively, thank you for everything you're doing and for joining us.
You're welcome.
Okay, so that was amazing, as expected. And so now what we're going to do is we're going to transition to our next guest speaker for the evening. And we are joined by Dr. Chance Lewis, who is I would consider him to be one of my mentors, and someone who I've had the opportunity and pleasure to co-write with. We actually did an edited book together, and he is one of the most prolific authors that there is. So just some really brief biographical things about Dr. Lewis. Chance W. Lewis is the Carol Groteness Bell Distinguished Professor of Urban Education at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte. He also serves as the Executive Director of the University of North Carolina at Charlotte's Urban Education Collaborative, which is publishing a new generation of research on improving urban schools. He is a prolific scholar who is responsible for securing extensive extramural funding, for mentoring a number of people in the academy. But I want to point your attention to something as we switch the screen over so that you can see him. Look behind him and look on his wall. If you want to know about someone who publishes a lot, those pictures on his walls are his book covers. Right? This gives you just an idea of how much he has put out there in terms of high quality work that is really serving to change the paradigm that we see in education. He is just an amazing individual, and we're so fortunate to have you. Thank you, Dr. Lewis, for joining us.
Thank you, Dr. Lewis, for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to be with you tonight.
Absolutely. So did you want to start by going through some of those comments you have prepared, and then we'll switch from there to a Q&A?
Sure.
Okay.
Pull it up.
And as he's pulling that up, remember, you can pose questions for him using the hashtag at Black Minds Matter. That's hashtag at Black Minds Matter. So he'll give some comments, and then from there we'll go into having opportunity for you to be able to hear from him for questions and answers. But at this point, I'm going to get out of the way and turn it over to Dr. Lewis.
Okay. Thank you. So you can see the PowerPoint, okay?
Yes, we can see it perfectly clear.
Well, as I mentioned, I thank you for the opportunity. I wanted to share a few thoughts for our discussion tonight, because when we deal with an important topic such as Black Minds Matter, one thing that we cannot forget is these students are in classrooms each and every day with educators who are charged with impacting their lives for many years to come. And in the work that I do, I don't take this for granted, because my goal and my mission in the work that I do is to support educators to, one, reach their full potential, so ultimately the students can have the best opportunity as well. And I start with this presentation with the story of myself. I'm originally from the great state of Louisiana, Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and I am a product of many schools where when you just say the name of the school, many educators and many community people, parents, sometimes will say, "Whoa, you really went to that school?" Or, "Wow, I can't believe you're a product of that particular school." And so when you look at the field of education, and oftentimes many of the negative characteristics that come from it, those are the schools that I'm a product of. So my address wasn't in the right part of town, so to speak, or, my family situation may not have been the most ideal, but what we're looking at in my situation and in the work that I do, there was somebody in the school who saw my potential and invested in me heavily to get to where I am today. So in looking at that and contextualizing our conversation for tonight in the short time that we have, I really want to focus in on those promising instructional practices that we can look at. So this is a little bit about my journey. So my journey has taken me from the great state of Louisiana, graduating from a historically Black college, Southern University in Louisiana, to actually teaching in the same city upon graduation. So I was unique, I guess, in many cases. I started teaching high school at another school that, when you say the name of it, many people have negative connotations of it, in the same city where I was born. But I had the opportunity to start teaching high school at the age of 20. So I had unique opportunities to relate heavily with the students, because I was very close to their age when I started. But I also had opportunity to teach students who were the same age as me as well. So that was a unique context. But in my time there, I had the opportunity to win the Teacher of the Year for the state of Louisiana, which fortunately I was awarded at that particular time. And then other opportunities opened up to pursue my PhD in the great state of Colorado at Colorado State University. And then one of the few that were hired as a faculty member at the same institution. And then after some time in Colorado, taught at Texas A&M University. And then now the journey has taken me to the University of North Carolina at Charlotte. So that's just a little bit of the background to set the case for what I want to talk about for today, because I want us to understand a couple of points that I think are very important for our conversation tonight. When we contextualize the everyday reality that goes on in schools around this country, I want you to pay attention to these 3 points as it deals with Black males. Every day they face a litany of or a lack of experienced teachers. And how do I know this? Because in most schools around the country that are predominantly Black, we find that they are exposed to more first and second year teachers than any other school setting in the country. And when we look at this, why is that important? Not that first and second year teachers cannot teach, but many of us know in the first or second year, many educators are still trying to find their way, get their rhythm, and really understand the nuances of effectively teaching in the classroom. But Black students in predominantly Black schools face more inexperienced or first and second year teachers than any other student population in the country. And I don't want us to forget that point, because when we look at what's going on, now we're putting the lives of a fertile group of students who are, in many cases in the educational system, have been minimized in so many cases into the hands of teachers who may not have the experience to take them to the highest places. Now, do some first and second year teachers do really good? Of course, but we're talking about as a whole, the lack of experienced teachers that they face. Secondly, each and every day they are exposed to a curriculum that doesn't lead to graduation, so they could be competitive for the most competitive college in their own states. And I'm talking about from public K through 12 schools to public colleges in their states. So this is based off of some of the work that I've done with my good colleague, Dr. Ivory Tolson. And what we find is that in many schools that Black males attend, they can go their entire K through 12 career and still not be exposed to each or all of the courses that they need just to be eligible for the most competitive public institution in their state. And I don't want to minimize what that means, because oftentimes we hear things like, well, everybody's not college material, but that's not necessarily for educators to choose who is and who isn't. But just based on the curriculum that is laid out for them, they may not even be able to have access to the classes that will make them eligible for admission to some of the more competitive colleges in their own state. So what does that mean? That means, unknowing to them and maybe even their parents, a range of opportunities are cut off after high school that they never even know about or even are told about. And some examples of that, for example, if I would take, since you all are in the great state of California, any of the UC schools that may require 4 credits of science upon graduation, but their school only offers 3. So for the student, they only can take what's offered, but if that 4th science class is not there, then they're not even eligible to be available for admittance unless some other alternative route is taken. And then third, that I want to lay as a context for tonight is when we hear about the ability for educators to connect with Black students, because particularly males, when students come to a class, there's something that happens on the first day of a class. I call it the silent game. And the instructor looks at the students and thinks certain things in their head. And then the students look at the instructor and they think some things in their head as well. And what usually happens within the first few minutes, the students make a determination on a couple of fronts. One, does this instructor have my best interest at heart? But then 2, will this instructor truly care about me beyond the subject matter? And usually what happens in situations like this is that if Black male students do not feel that the instructor has their best interests at heart, and also that the instructor will go above and beyond for them, there's going to be a hard time of connection in that classroom, because it does not take students long at all to quote unquote size an instructor up about their true aspirations for them. So given that, for the sake of time, here are some recommendations that I want to put forward with some promising instructional practices. When we think about teaching, and I think this is very important, one thing we don't do well in our classrooms, particularly for Black male students, is to show them shining examples of people who look like them that are performing in a field of interest. So why do we have this common notion that Black males only want to be athletes or entertainers? Because we have not done a good job in showing them other examples of what they can be. So in the work that I do across the country, there are some underlying programs that are out there that I think are very important that I think educators really need to consider. One promising practice, as I would call it, is what I call virtual mentors in the student's field of interest, because every kid has something that they're interested in. But in many cases around the country, students, and this happens in many predominantly white schools, but not predominantly Black schools. In predominantly white schools, many of the students are matched up with a virtual mentor while they are taking academic course content, let's just say in middle school or high school. So for example, if a student says, I want to be a medical doctor with a specialty as an OBGYN, what happens in many of these schools that I'm referring to is that they are actually matched up with a current practicing medical doctor in that field of interest. And the virtual mentor partners with the teacher to customize the course content around the field of interest. Now, if we think about what that means for a Black male in a school, what if they on a daily basis or weekly basis can talk virtually with somebody, one who may or may not look like them, but has a vested interest in that particular student? For example, if I'm a medical doctor and I am talking with a young Black male in middle school, I can answer questions that this student may have that may not come out in the course content. I can talk about some of the trends in the field. I can talk about why the mathematics class is important, even though you have an interest in science. I can talk about why the art class is important, even though you have an interest in the science. So what happens in this situation is that the virtual mentor around the country, many of them around the country, are working with teachers to customize that course content to make the learning experience unique for the student. And what usually happens as well is that portions of, if we use the medical doctor example, portions of surgeries are broadcast live for the student to see in middle school. And then they can dissect what's going on in the medical profession that may not have come through in a normal basis. Second point, project-based learning. When we look at Black males, what usually happens in many schools, especially elementary schools, usually the younger grades allows the students to move around, be active, but as they get older, middle school, high school, we just want students, particularly Black males, to sit, do the sit and get approach where they sit all day and they're not allowed to move around. But what project-based learning does for students, it allows them to have an opportunity to have a hands-on approach in the learning activity. Because the reason why that's important, it involves them in using their hands, using their senses, using their motor skills to be involved in the learning. And the benefit on the other side is that for teachers who express disappointment because of discipline problems, you now have a student who's now more engaged in the learning. So a promising practice that I want educators to consider is to use project-based learning, but not just in a normal fashion, but use it in a way where it highlights the skills of a student in a productive way, where they can get involved in learning and raise a level of excitement that has never been shared before. Because One way we can know if we're doing project learning correctly is if the teacher moves from the sole center of instruction to more of a facilitator. Third point, really quickly, here's one thing that I see as I go across the country that many educators are not doing well in the classroom, particularly as it relates to Black male students. They have their particular state academic standards, but they have less than favorable ways of connecting them to the real life of the student. And when we look at those who write the curriculum, they may not understand the everyday realities of the student, but one of our charges as great educators, hopefully we did not get into education to say, I'm going to teach this type of student and put an asterisk by that, but we have to find the ways to make the curriculum come to life for the students so then their proverbial light bulb can go off to say, hey, I'm interested now in this course content. I see the connection, I see my life, and I think this is that important for me to consider as I prepare my teaching, because if it holds the difference between life and death for my Black male students and other students as well, it's something that I'm charged to do and I think really needs to happen. Fourth, incorporation of field-based components to supplement learning. Here's a term that I think everybody could write down: exposure. And when you start to look at exposure, I think that's something that's important because many of us learn by being exposed to different learning situations. And these are some things that we have to consider for students as well, particularly our Black male students. Even though budgets have been cut, there are things that we can do that are cost effective or free to expose our students to learning opportunities. And then finally, just for sake of time, involving parents as instructional partners. And this is something that we could get into more, but one thing we have to consider in many schools, particularly for parents of Black male students, the only time that a parent is called if there is a problem, particularly a discipline problem. So I think one of the things that we need to consider is how do we set up a situation where parents are viewed more as instructional partners who can assist with the academic components of the classroom versus just being called when there's a situation as well. So these are some points I wanted to at least set up for us for our conversation for tonight that we can look at as we approach this particular topic as well. So I'll stop there just for sake of time and be open for any questions.
Dr. Luce?
Yes.
Thank you. Those are absolutely fantastic comments and really helps to set up the framing for this and just really good recommendations with the virtual mentors, project-based learning, exposing students to different learning opportunities. So how have you learned about these strategies? Is this based upon the extensive research that you've done? And are there certain practices that work better in certain types of contexts than in comparison to others? Or are these kind of like general principles of practice?
Great question. So part of it came from research. As I do my work in books I produce and articles that I produce, and talking to educators around the country about what works, I think some of these particular recommendations have come about from what educators wish they would have done after the fact. But when I go to many schools and look at the practice on the ground, and I start to see things like virtual mentors being broadcast, like I'm being broadcast to you tonight, that are in the trenches with students, showing them skills that will make them so much more marketable after schools, and the students are creating field-based portfolios for these particular students. I think it puts certain students at an advantage and others at a disadvantage. So, these recommendations that I've provided tonight are some that can go across school type, no matter where they are in the country, but particularly that that I want to specify in schools that are predominantly Black and male, I think they could be particularly effective as we frame it for tonight's conversation.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so this question comes from a student who's in the public course, Chris Osmond, who says, how can involving parents of Black boys and men in classroom work help to diminish deficit thinking among teachers, administrators, and students?
That's a great question. I think one of the things that we look at when you start to involve parents, the first order of business that I think we have to do is teachers have to call parents starting at the beginning of the year, sharing good news, because by just sharing good news initially, like, I'm glad to have your student in my classroom. I'm looking forward to working with that student. I'm looking forward to having you as an instructional partner. All of these things go a long way just to set the initial backdrop of what we need to do for a classroom. But then as we move further, from that point, I think it's also important to think about how we want to work with parents. And I'll give 3 quick examples. One, a teacher who really wants to involve parents and kind of break stereotypes of what parents are there to do. The teacher can provide information to the parents at the outset and throughout the year of how they can help their children learn at home. Because teachers assign work, but oftentimes they do not share what can be done at home. Secondly, offering information on community services that can help their child. And then explanations about course expectations and things of that nature that will break the stereotypes, because I do not know one parent that does not want their kid to learn. So parents have to understand what the teacher's expectations are and if they truly want them to be involved. So that goes a long way in answering the question that was posed by the student of how the parents can be used as a vital resource in the classroom. It starts with the teacher initially breaking the ice to say, hey, I really do want you involved, and I'm going to call you initially with good news and share how you can be involved with your student in our classroom.
Absolutely. All right, so this next question comes from a student who's in the physical class named Terry Sivers, who says, do African-centered schools or homeschooling offer a legitimate alternative for educating our Black children, given the pervasive challenges that we see in public schools?
Yes, they offer a viable alternative. And what you're looking at when you look at many of these schools that are out there, they're offering the connection of what I'm talking about that could really be done in any school. But due to the absence in many of our traditional schools, these types of schools have stepped up to fill the void. And here's the main void that we see. And, some of you, I see comments on the screen reference Dr. Latson Billings' work with culturally relevant. That's one of those terms that have been vital to the field of education, but often misunderstood on the ground. But what we mean with the African-centered schools is that they are exposing the students to their culture, their history, as we heard from the earlier presenter, but then also showing the students a viable option of how their culture and their experiences could be used for academic learning experiences and academic learning situations that could help propel them to higher academic achievement. And when this is not in the classroom, these are missed opportunities for the students. So thus you see the rise of African-centered schools as some viable options that parents are considering or have considered for their students, because they are not getting that in some cases in traditional public schools.
Absolutely. Definitely a viable alternative. So this question comes from Quincy Penn, who's a student in the physical class. He says, how do we hold schools accountable for adding Black history to the curriculum, especially when they're not educated on Black history?
Well, that's a great question. And that starts with leadership. And we're talking about principal leadership and teacher leadership, because As I go to the quote that I said earlier, when we become educators, we really take a pledge to do whatever it needs to be done to allow our students to reach their full learning potential. So based on the question that is asked, is that the involvement of Black history, if that is a learning opportunity to help the students understand the academic material, we have to understand how to implement it correctly. We have to do our homework as educators so the students could do their homework, because you can do more harm trying to present Black history and do it in the wrong way than sometimes not even doing it at all. So what we have to do is think about, for educators, our own willingness to learn, but also the willingness to implement it correctly. But I think one thing to really answer that question at the core of it is that we have to consider from the principal level and the teacher level, do we want to approach the topic of Black history in our classroom? Because some will say, no, I don't want it in my classroom. And unfortunately, that's the major power that an educator can have, because they have the power to choose what they will or what they will not expose students to. But I encourage anybody that's watching the video tonight and hearing my voice is that we have to be willing to make bold moves in education. We know what's not working. So if the incorporation of Black history in our classrooms can ultimately raise the achievement level of our Black males and other students in the classroom, this is something that we have to do. And the work that I do around the country is sitting down, rolling up my sleeves with educators to show them how to effectively prepare lessons that are monumental in changing the trajectory of students as they move forward as well. So I think it can be done. I know it can be done. It's just the educator's willingness to make it happen in their classroom.
Absolutely. So do you have time to take two more questions?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So this one comes from James Wallace, who's a student in the public course, and he says, why are teacher education programs not teaching first-year teachers the importance of connecting the state requirements to curriculum that is relevant to students' lives?
Okay. Well, I have a non-traditional answer to that question that I want people to consider. When we think about teacher education programs and we think about, I want us to just zero in for a minute on those who are the teacher educators. Okay, so those are the ones who are preparing those who want to be teachers. When universities hire them, oftentimes they say, we prefer you to have teaching experience, but it's not required. You know, the only thing is really required is that you have if you're a faculty member, maybe a PhD, you've done a dissertation. But here's a quote I want us to consider. Can you prepare a teacher to go to teach in a place that you have never been? And when you think about that, at its core, can you prepare a teacher to go to a place that you have never been? Then a lot of things will strike home for us, because as we start to look at this, many faculty who are in teacher education have not taught in an urban school, have never experienced Black male students in an academic setting, have never experienced their culture, have never experienced dealing with the realities of their communities, the realities of their families. And now this person is charged with preparing somebody else to go in a setting to do what I just described. And so when you look at what's offered in many universities around the country, those who are setting up the curriculum in the teacher education programs are setting up situations based off what they may feel is the best thing for the student. And what ultimately happens now, they produce graduates that then perpetuate what they have been taught. So what you're seeing in many cases is just an example of the cycle. that has been put out, because when you look at the effectiveness of graduates of many of the programs, they're only as good as they're prepared. So I want everybody to think about that quote as you consider what's going on in teacher education, to understand sometimes some of the reality that happens each and every day.
Absolutely. Very powerful. And it's a great point that I personally have never considered. And thank you for bringing that up. So we'll take the last question. This comes from Stacy Teeters, who is a student in the physical course. And she says, Dr. Lewis, you mentioned that virtual mentors can help contextualize learning for students. In addition to using mentors, what can we do to better structure curricula to provide students with a contextualized and more meaningful educational experience?
Great question. And I will go back to something I said earlier. When we look at the curriculum as it's stated in each and every state, what we're required to teach the students, what we have for them to achieve, is up to us as educators. I'm talking about principals, instructional leaders, instructional coaches, and all the many names that we give them in the schools, to take that curriculum and make it come to life for students. So how do we do that? Okay. We have to understand the everyday realities of the students, okay, and use that as a way to, as Dr. Latson Billings talks about in one of my books, where you have to take the curriculum, you have to deconstruct the curriculum, and then you have to rebuild it again that is useful for the students in the school that you are working in. By doing so, then it will allow the opportunity for students to have a great opportunity to learn. So let me give you one example before my time is up. I'll take a simple, let's just say second grade, third grade standard multiplication, okay? And many of us learn multiplication through the traditional, drill and kill approach. You write it 1,000 times, you should get it. Okay. And then from that point, you should be able to apply it. But what if Dr. would allow me to use an example of a famous restaurant that we all know. And the name of that restaurant is, anybody want to say it?
In-N-Out, McDonald's.
There you go. So I'm on the East Coast and you're on the West Coast, and I know that, right? But what if, using that example, I walked into a McDonald's and I asked the manager, I said, how many value meals do you sell in a day? And he said, on average, we sell about 2,000. And I said, wow, that's a lot of value meals. And I said, what's the price? Well, our premium value meals, as he terms it, around $7. Our not as premium, his words, are around $3, $4. So sake of simple math, $5. So I said, okay, well, if you sell 2,000 value meals in a day and average price is $5, it's safe to assume, just for sake of simple math, that you make about $10,000 in gross income per day. And I said, okay, and this is for the students in the class, if they make $10,000 per day on just value meals, and McDonald's is open 7 days a week, how much do they make per week on just value meals? $70,000, because they're open 7 days a week, right? And then if we assume 4 weeks in a month, that's $280,000. And just for sake of time, if there's 12 months in a year, that's $3,360,000 on just value meals at this one McDonald's. Now, I could go on and on with that, but just for sake of time, multiplication now has a new mirror to look in, because I'm not doing the drill and kill approach, but I'm now relating it to everyday reality. So now for a student, multiplication means something else, because now I can understand my everyday reality as I learn about multiplication. And so this is what I'm talking about, deconstructing the curriculum, constructing it again, and then shaping it in a way that is important for students to understand as well. So to answer your question, that's how we make our learning for students that much more important for their learning opportunities.
Well, that was amazing. Thank you so much. Your wisdom, the work that you are doing is top notch, and it's really setting, really better preparing a lot of people to go and work in schools where they may not look like the students who are there. Thank you for that. Thank you for joining us on Black Minds Matter. And there's a lot of questions that we couldn't get to because everybody had a million questions for you. So just know that Twitter's blowing up in case you want to see some of them. But thank you so much.
Okay, thank you so much.
Really appreciate it. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to just recap real quick some of the things that we heard from our two speakers so far. So from Ilyasa Shabazz, she says we have to be able to see ourselves in these stories, in this equation, talk about the importance of culturally relevant materials. We have to be willing to address these injustices. She talked about the fact that it's important to educate and teach the truth to our children, that there is no superior or inferior group. Unfortunately, that is an ideology that is embedded within our educational system. She also said that students need to be able to understand their power and the value that they bring to the table. And also that we want a productive, progressive nation, but we're number 26 in education. We want all children to flourish. However, we don't have a good understanding or positive curricula for people of color. So very many great points that we learned from Ilyasa, and from Chance Lewis, from Dr. Lewis. He talked about the importance of having virtual mentors who work with teachers to customize their content. He really talked about the importance of project-based learning and not having a sit and get kind of approach, but use project-based learning to highlight student skills. He also, was somewhat critical about how we sometimes approach our work as teachers, and saying, teachers do not get to decide who is college material. That is something that a student should be able to choose for themselves. He talked about the importance of exposing students to different learning opportunities and learning situations. He talked about the importance of being able to build positive relationships with parents, and saying that, the teachers need to call students, to basically call home about students with good news early on to kind of build that rapport. And then the last statement that I have written down here for him, he says, and this was in response to a question about, how come we don't have teachers who are being prepared to go into schools to teach a demographic that's different than them. He says, and he talked about, the demographic, not the demographic, but the of our teacher educators. It says, can you prepare a teacher to go teach in a place that you have never been? And the answer to that question is likely no. So with that, we just want to thank you for joining us for tonight. We truly appreciate your time. I will say this, if you're a part of one of our sites, this would be the time where you would want to go and visit the questions. If you're participating as an individual learner, what we're going to do is now move to another segment where we're going to replay an interview that was done with Dr. Jawanza Kunjufu. So for those who are staying on, you'll get to see the interview. For those who are at the sites, again, this will be the time to go to your discussion questions. And what we're going to do is play that interview from the very beginning. Let's just go from the very beginning. So thank you for joining us for Black Minds Matter. Have a good rest of your evening.
Hello, everyone. We're joined today by Dr. Jawanza Kunjufu, who I refer to as the father of Black male studies. Dr. Kunjufu was educated at Morgan State University, Illinois State, and at Union Graduate School. He is a prolific author and speaker. He's spoken at most colleges and universities, as well as school districts throughout the country, and has authored over 40 books, including The Conspiracy to Destroy Black Boys, Keeping Black Boys Out of Special Education, and Understanding Black Male Learning Styles. Dr. Kunjufu's work has been featured by a variety of outlets, including Essence Magazine, Ebony Magazine, MSNBC, and by Oprah. Thank you, Dr. Kunjufu, for joining us. It is truly a pleasure and honor to have you with us today.
The pleasure's mine, Luke. You're doing great work.
Well, you're the one that started this all out with your so many books that you've published that have looked at the Black male experience and have really set this field in motion. So thank you for being the father of Black male studies.
You're welcome.
So for those who may be newer to this work and maybe just now starting to learn about some of the issues facing Black boys and men in education, can you tell them a little bit about your background, what brought you to this work, and kind of the work that you do?
Well, let me just first mention that in 1982, I wrote Countering the Conspiracy to Destroy Black Boys, Volume 1.
Mm-hmm.
And then I did Volume 2 in 86, Volume 3 in 90, and Volume 4 in 1994. Ironically, Luke, I was a student at Morgan State University, and they couldn't find dormitory space for me. So I asked the Lord, where can I stay in Baltimore and study at Morgan State? I was there for 1 year on exchange program. And the Lord told me to call a juvenile delinquent center and convince them that I'm a positive Black male role model. And I was able to stay on the 3rd floor. Now, these were boys 8 to 13 years of age that had problems with their parents and with the school system. So they're very young and innocent. And they were on the 1st and 2nd floor. And I was their mentor living on the 3rd floor. And that was in 1973. I think that was the genesis of my love for Black boys and the challenges that they're experiencing. I remember when I was a consultant, and I'm still a consultant with school districts, and I was concerned that large numbers of Black boys, I noticed that test scores for some reason were declining around 5th grade. Now, I never knew my research was going to be used like this. Governors now are determining prison growth based on 4th grade reading skills.
Yes.
My objective was to have schools intervene at a critical grade, 4th grade, and provide more male teachers, more male mentors, rites of passage, a more relevant reading program, more right brain lesson plans. I never wanted governors to build prisons as a result of a deficiency in reading schools.
Yes, absolutely. In fact, the first time I learned that was in reading one of your works, and I have to say that it shocked me and shocked many of the people who were in the room that we would look at a child and basically determine their futures based upon how they're performing in 4th grade.
Exactly. I mean, we have in the book we document, we have a little boy scored the 98th percentile at the beginning of the 3rd grade. That same boy at the end of the 7th grade, his scores dropped to the 35th percentile. So from 98 to 35, from 92 to 24, from 63 to 7. Yeah. And I was just concerned, something's happening to our boys. How could they do so well? This problem is not genetic. If the problem was genetic, they could not have scored at the 98th percentile at the beginning of the 3rd grade. This problem is systemic, and there are a myriad of reasons that's driving this 4th grade syndrome. But one of them is that a Black boy nationwide can go K3, maybe K6, maybe K8, and not experience a Black male teacher.
Yeah.
So as you and I know, Lou, 83% of America's elementary school teachers are white and female. So my first question is the future of the Black race in the hands of white female teachers?
And that's true. And what you've done, especially I've read one of your recent books on Black male learning styles, you basically try to say, okay, then as an educator, you have this responsibility for teaching these boys in the right way, and you provide guidance for those teachers to recognizing that a lot of them simply do not look like us.
Exactly. And let me now switch the role. I'm now going to interview you, Luke. Question
okay.
number 1. What year, the questions will become more difficult. Question number 1, what year was Brown versus Topeka?
So going Brown v. Board?
Yes.
Okay, well, that's going to be 1954, and Brown 2 is in 55.
Okay, very good, Luke. Now, in 1954, did we have special education?
You know, I don't know.
We didn't have it. So the next question is, what year did we create Public Law 194 for special education?
I don't know the answer to that.
1975.
Really?
So see, here's my next concern. has special ed become a dumping ground for female teachers who do not understand male learning styles? And notice, I didn't say black male learning styles, because even white boys are placed in special ed more than white girls. Mm-hmm. There's a 2-to-1 ratio of white boys to white girls in special ed. There's a 3-to-1 ratio of black boys to black girls in special education. So special ed was never designed for males to populate that particular program.
And so, wow, I mean, that's a lot to take in. So you're asserting that special education was created post-Brown as a dumping ground for boys in general, but particularly for black boys.
Correct, because with a large percentage of teachers being white and female, for some people think that if you're different from me, you're deficient of me. Just because boys have a shorter attention span does not mean they should be placed in special ed. Just because they have a higher energy level does not mean they should be placed in special ed. Large numbers of male students are oral, tactile, and kinesthetic learners. Yeah. The real challenge is, now, as you know, Luke, in primary grades, most teachers use a whole brain pedagogy, mm-hmm. both left and right brain. But from the 4th grade on, it's primarily a left brain pedagogy. Some teachers can't teach without a worksheet or a lecture. But large numbers of oral, tactile, and kinesthetic learners need something beyond a textbook, a worksheet, or a lecture.
Yeah, I mean, if we think about how we socialize boys, I mean, we give them toys early on that require them to be physically engaged, blocks, cars, trucks, so they're constantly moving. And then, of course, they then begin to learn through movement, and that sedentary style that sets in terms of how teachers teach really doesn't do justice to them. So is it that then that disconnect between that learning style and the basically the presentation of special education as an opportunity to move these students out of the classroom? You're seeing that as essentially two factors that are merging together to produce the disparate patterns that we see?
Yes, we could reduce special ed placement, and we could improve the academic achievement of all boys if we understood their learning styles. If we understood that males have a different learning style. In one of our books on Understanding Black Male Learning Styles, we talk about gender differences. Now, mm-hmm. one of the differences, Luke, is that girls mature faster than boys. Only 12% of Black boys by 8th grade are proficient in reading. My latest book is titled Reading and Writing for Urban Survival. Mm-hmm. Because, Luke, I believe that literacy is a civil rights issue for the 21st century. If we can't find, how can the richest country in the world only have 12% of Black boys proficient in reading by 8th grade? And as you and I know, if you have a mastered reading, how are you going to be academically competitive, economically competitive for this economy?
Yeah, and as a learner, how are you going to learn history, social sciences, science, mathematics, or any other discipline if you're reading behind grade level?
Correct. So, for example, many girls may be ready to read in preschool or in the primary division, but many boys are not ready for literacy in preschool or in kindergarten. That's one concern. But the second concern is that, let's be honest, do people read everything, or do you read that interests you? And so what we've developed is a collection of books titled Best Books for Boys, mm-hmm. because large numbers of boys are not interested in romance novels, in fiction, but they are interested in technology, in hip hop, in sports, in science, in history and culture. And so what we're trying to do with school districts is to have them provide literature that's more compatible to male interests and their learning styles.
Absolutely. And I've seen the collection. It's a set of very culturally relevant reading resources. So I hope that people will take a look at that as an opportunity to really help students connect what they're learning to their actual lives. I read, there's a scholar who talks about the difference between what are called mirror books and window books. Window books are where you essentially peer through a window into someone else's life, versus mirror books where you're looking at something in the mirror that's reflective of your own life, where you have characters and stories
that reflect your own experience. And so your resources are essentially mirror resources for our community.
Exactly. In the book Reading and Writing for Urban Survival, we spent a couple of pages talking about the life of Khalif Browder. Do you remember Khalif Browder?
No, I don't.
I'm sure you heard the story where this young man was accused of stealing something, and he denied stealing it. His lawyer wanted him to plea bargain because, as you know, Luke, 97% of cases don't go to trial.
Yeah.
But he knew he didn't steal the book bag, so he didn't plea bargain. Well, they placed him in jail and required a $5,000 bond. Well, as you know, large numbers of low-income Black families can't pay $3,000 to $5,000 for a bond. He waited for trial for 3 years for something he did not do. They placed him in solitary confinement.
Okay, this story is reminiscent now, yes.
He committed suicide upon his release because of what he went through, this emotional trauma that he went through. And so we wanted to make this story alive because it happens so much in Black male America. Yeah,
there's too many Khalifs out there.
Exactly. Let me ask you another question,
okay.
Luke, since we're now switching roles. Are there more Black males in college, or are there more Black males in prison?
Well, I'm going to assume that there's more Black males in prison because so many of us traverse the criminal justice system.
Yes, and unfortunately, there's over 1 million African-American males in prison. Now, Luke, let me ask you another question. It's 1 million in 2017. What was the number in 1980?
Well, I would say that judging upon population size, probably somewhere around 700,000.
It was only 100,000. So 5 grams of crack drove the prison population from 100,000 in 1980 to 1 million in 2017. But here's what I want to reinforce your work, Luke, because what the media does not tell us is that last year we broke another record. There are 1.4 million Black males in college, prison. And I think all of our boys need to know that their future is not going to prison. Their future is going to UCLA, going to college, going to Morehouse.
Or going to San Diego State University.
Going to San Diego State. Very good. Yes. Very good.
So you talked about in terms of this breakdown in 4th grade, right? I want to revisit this. And a lot of times we know a lot of these individuals are young boys are not able to read at level. And you talked about the need for culturally relevant resources so that they can learn to read by being able to be more engaged because they have texts that speak to their lives. Are there any other breakdowns that you see beyond the need for culturally relevant texts that are producing these disparate outcomes in reading?
Well, I think in one of my earlier books titled Changing School Culture for African American Males, Luke, there are 2 things that we have to do in the culture. The first one, we have to convince teachers that the major reason why, let's say, whites are scoring 1,100 on the SAT and African Americans only 900 is not poverty, is not the number of parents in the home, is not the income of the parents, is not the educational background of the parents. We have to convince educators that the reason for the gap are their lower expectations, less time on task and classroom management. See, we have to convince educators that the reasons for the gap are not external. See, many teachers want to blame factors they have no control over. I mean, let's be honest, Luke, what can a teacher do about the income of the home, or the missing father, or the mother lacking a college degree? But there are many educators that love looking at those factors. But the other part of the culture that we have to change is the Black male peer group discourages academic achievement. As you know, Luke, in some schools, when a Black male is doing well in school, he's teased. Sometimes he's called a sissy. Sometimes he's accused of acting white. Now, being smart is acting white, then how do you act Black? So in order to change the culture, we have to convince teachers that their expectations make the difference. And we have to convince the Black peer group that it is okay, it is ideal to be academically sound. And if those two things are not in place, it's going to be very difficult to achieve academic achievement. Now, Luke, let me ask you another question.
Okay.
And you're younger than I. You're about 30 years younger. So don't let an elder ask you this question and know more about this than you do.
Okay.
What was the name of this video between 50 and Sierra that talked about Black male peer groups? What was the name of the video between 50 and Sierra?
Unfortunately, I don't know the answer to that one.
It was titled, Can't Leave Them Alone. And what Sierra said, I tried that good boy from San Diego State, but that dope boy, that thug, that baller is turning me on. Black boys are not stupid. The message is real clear. If you want to get Sierra, it is not being a scholar, it's being a baller, a thug, a dealer. And that's what our boys are being socialized to believe.
Well, I mean, if you think about what they see of images on TV, what they hear on the radio, what they see in magazines, in print, online, why would they think anything different?
Exactly. And so, as you know, Luke, in many schools nationwide, there are schools where there's not one Black male in the building. And if a Black male was there, I'm going to wager he's a security guard first, a janitor second, a PE teacher third, an administrator fourth, and a classroom teacher last.
Yeah.
And if he's a classroom teacher, he's probably high school first, middle and junior second, intermediate third, and primary last. So it's very possible that a Black boy can go K3, maybe K6, and never experience a Black male teacher. Never seen a Black man read a book and operate a computer.
I never had a Black male teacher. I never had a Black teacher until I got to college.
So Luke, tell me, how do we explain your success? Was it strong expectations from your parents? What did it for you?
Well, it wasn't, I mean, my parents were very positive about school. They thought it was important, but ultimately they would have been happy had I done anything else beyond going to college. They would have been happy if I went to the military or got a good job. Ultimately, I had teachers who believed in me and who supported me. And now I didn't have all my teachers who felt that way. I had teachers who were overtly racist, and I had teachers who were wonderful mentors. And I latched onto those who were the wonderful mentors who went out of their way to guide me, to support me. But here's the difference. And I think this gets back to something that you said earlier. It's about high expectations. No one ever rises to low expectations. And I had several teachers who had extremely high expectations for me. And that motivated me to do more and to do better.
It also sounds, Luke, that you had a high level of self-esteem.
Yes, I did have a high level of self-esteem.
And what contributed to that? Was it athletics? Was it your parents? Was it the church? Was it grandparents, uncles? What do you think helped to develop your self-esteem?
Well, I would definitely say that it was my parents, but I would also bring it back to church. I mean, church for me was a sanctuary. It was an environment where I could grow. There was we had lots of church plays and musicals, and so I was pushed out front to have different roles in those activities. I had a very close relationship with our pastor growing up and his wife and their family. And so church for me was my second home. And I think that's true for a lot of us who've been able to succeed and get to this point. We have strong religious backgrounds and networks of support that are rooted in the church.
And let me ask you this, Lucas. See, what I'm really driving at is that we need to study more success rather than failure. We need to look at those Black boys in 6th grade or 9th grade or 12th grade or in college that are doing academically well and ascertain what attributes, what characteristics, what traits are driving their success so that we can replicate that with other boys that are having some challenges. Mm-hmm. Because, for example, when you went to college, I'm sure there was a large number of African-American males who entered freshman year with you, who did not graduate with you 4 to 6 years later.
Yeah, in fact, I remember at orientation, they used to say this, I think, to most people when they would go to orientation. They'd have all of us in this big, large room, and then they would say, look to your left, look to your right, only one of you will graduate, which is, I think, one of the worst things you could tell somebody. But, and that was true, though. by the time I got to my senior year, most of the people who I came in with, they weren't there. And I had challenges. I mean, at one point in time, I almost dropped out of college. I had 11 incompletes on my transcript. I wasn't doing well in school, but I had several mentors, one of them who was a Black male who basically supported me through challenging times.
One of the things we recommend in our books, the first one is a peer mentoring system.
Mm-hmm.
So that, for example, the buddy system, so that in fourth grade, a teacher would match you with another fourth grade male student that was academically sound. Another idea is where you have, let's say, a sixth grader mentoring a fourth grader,
mm-hmm.
and they will do that for 2 years until he graduates from high school, from elementary school. And then in high school, you have a junior who would mentor a freshman for 2 years. And if we continue that, even at the collegiate level, we'll see some excellent success coming from that.
Yeah, I mean, that model of the near peer mentoring, I think, is one that tends to work well, because you have someone who's went through those experiences and they're on the other side of it, but they're still young enough or closer in age enough to be able to relate. So
exactly. Now, are you aware of the program titled Call Me Mr.?
Yes, I am. Do you want to tell the folks about that program?
Well, I think it's an excellent program because, as you know, Luke, only 1% of America's elementary school teachers are Black and male.
Mm-hmm.
And only 6% are African American. So we have to increase the number of African American male teachers. And this program, Call Me Mr., that was founded in Clemson, South Carolina, and is now on about 15 campuses in about 10 states nationwide, provides grants and scholarships. They bring people like you and I in to mentor their male students. And I think it's a fantastic program. And I think it needs to be done on more than just 15 campuses nationwide.
Agreed. Because eventually you have to see someone who looks like you. I mean, if you go into an environment and you're in preschool and kindergarten, first grade, second grade, and you never see someone at the front of the classroom who looks like you, that environment becomes one that is socialized as a power structure for those who are in the front, who are typically, as you said, white and women. And so you see, as you mentioned, boys, they begin to disengage in school pretty early on, 4th, 5th, 6th grade, because the person in the front of the classroom is one that's not reflective of them. They see a person who is white, and so they see that domain as a white domain. They see a person who is female, so they see it as a feminized domain. And then you get, as you said, you have boys who then who are studious, who raise their hands, who engage in that classroom environment, are then the same ones who end up being picked on and bullied in the schoolyard, but we haven't shown them anything different.
Exactly. 2 quick points. The first one is that you can't teach a child that you are afraid of. Mm. And there are teachers, especially white females, especially in the upper grades, who are afraid of Black boys. Secondly, you can't teach a child and you don't understand their culture. Now, right quick, Luke, what is code switching?
Code switching is when you are a person who can navigate between a Black culture and a white culture. So you may switch your language, you may switch your body language, you may switch just your overall engagement with people depending upon what context you're in.
So can you imagine, Luke, if you were fortunate enough to have a teacher who appreciated your culture, who did not put a negative or derogatory comment on Black English or Ebonics, allowed you to say it first in Ebonics, and then politely asked you to restate it, to rewrite it in standard English? That's code switching. Mm-hmm. Let me ask you another question, Luke.
Okay.
What are the language art skills for playing the dozens, signifying, cracking, ranking, joning? What are some academic language art skills needed to jone, to signify, to crack, to play the dozens?
Why don't you tell us?
No, Luke, you're cheating. You're cheating.
The questions aren't getting easier.
I know. And unfortunately, there are students, Luke, that are suspended because they were playing the dozens, because they were cracking or ranking on each other. And yet, as you know, the dozens is a verbal word game designed to avoid a fight. Yeah. They want to find out who's the best or who's the baddest, because they can't physically hit each other. They created an academic language arts game called the dozens. Yep. And there are language arts skills like the ability to rhyme, quick thinking skills, hyperboles, rhythm. And so those are skills that teachers could use in school culture. So if you really understand the culture, you can tell a student, you can't play the dozens in my class, but since you were so well versed playing the dozens, I want you to be the MC of all my programs. I want you on my debate team, my drama department. You stroke their ego where they are. The other quick thing I want to mention, Luke, is that when you speak to high school students, high school males, and ask them, what are the 3 best ways to get paid? What would they say?
Well, the number one is going to be sports.
Which one?
The number one is going to be sports.
Now, there's only one sport.
Football and basketball.
No, there's only one. That's the NBA.
That's true.
So it's either I'm going pro in the NBA, I'm going to be a rapper, or the first drug dealer never to get caught. Yeah. So Luke, what you and I have to do when we come in and speak to students, we have to convince them that education pays. And right now, they aren't convinced of that. They believe the odds are better going pro in the NBA, being a rapper or a baller, rather than being a professor at San Diego State.
Well, it's because they never see the alternative. And so that's another strategy, right?
And that's why mentoring program, every school should have a mentoring program where either once a month or once a week, they invite positive male role models like you and I out to speak to their students.
Absolutely. And that's also another way of bringing that cultural relevance into that academic environment, right? By allowing them to see people in front of them who are representative of their life and their experience, who can talk about whatever concept that they're learning about in class and even show how they're using it in the work that they actually do.
Exactly. And when you mention relevance, that is so critical to this plight of African-American children in general and Black boys in particular. Because as you know, Luke, there's still large numbers of schools that are teaching that Columbus discovered America, that Lincoln freed the slaves. And let me ask you this. Who was the first doctor? Who really is the father of medicine?
Isn't it Imhotep?
Very good, Imhotep. But at San Diego State, who do they teach as the father of medicine?
Hippocrates?
Hippocrates.
Hippocrates.
And so we have a curriculum titled SECLE, SETCLAE, self-esteem through culture, leads to academic excellence. Look, I have never met a child who knew Imhotep was the first doctor who associated being smart with being white. What I'm really getting at is that large numbers of Black children are suffering from post-traumatic slavery disorder. They believe they're better in sports than science, believe they're better in music than math, believe they're better in rap than reading. And we need a curriculum and teachers who will convince them that is not true.
Okay, so if I'm a white teacher, white female teacher in particular, since that's the majority of those who are teaching our boys and sons, what is something that I can do tomorrow to help change this paradigm? What is something that I can put in place in my classroom?
Well, I think the first thing is that, for example, we have this rule called Rule 555. 95% of a teacher's problems come from 5% of their students, which are probably male students. And those problems occur in the first 5 minutes and the last 5 minutes of the class period. So if you're a master teacher, you've identified the 5% of your students that are causing 95% of your problems. And you were at your best the first 5 minutes of the class period. Because as you know, Luke, children act up when they walk in class and they see you aren't ready to teach.
Yeah.
They also act up when they finish early and you don't give them any additional work to do. So that would be my first one. The second recommendation I would have, there's a program called TESSA, Teacher Expectation, Student Achievement. And one of the features of TESSA is the response opportunities. If you're a master teacher, there should be equitable distribution of response opportunities. Mm-hmm. Many teachers are guilty of calling on some students more than others.
Yeah.
Let me translate. They call on female students more than they call on male students. The other component of TESSA is feedback. Now, teachers will tell you they believe all children can learn, But when a black boy gives an incorrect answer, he's given about 6 seconds of feedback, of engagement to change his wrong answer. But when a white girl gets the answer wrong, she was given clue after clue after clue. 3.5 minutes later, she figured it out. Now, theoretically, the teacher told you and I in a workshop, they believed all children can learn.
Mm-hmm.
If that was true, why did you engage Willie only for 6 seconds, but you engaged Miss Ann for 3.5 minutes? It's because you had higher expectations and you knew at some point she would give you the correct answer.
That's real. And too often we have these ascriptions of intelligence where we assume that our Black sons are simply not as intelligent, unable to perform in the classroom. And that plays out through unconscious bias. I mean, even a very well-meaning, caring teacher who really wants to do the right thing, too often there's so much bias that's taking place there. Unless they begin to truly do that internal work to identify it and confront it, that's what's going to be replicated in the classroom, is that example that you gave.
Exactly. I don't know how much time we have left. Let me ask you another quick question.
Okay.
Who was Malcolm Little?
Malcolm X.
Okay, but he was born Malcolm Little.
Yes.
He was a brilliant 8th grade honor roll student. And one day his teacher, Mr. Swastik, asked Malcolm Little, what do you want to be? And what did Malcolm say?
I believe he said that he wanted to be either a doctor or a lawyer or something that was high level, right?
Exactly. He said he wanted to be a lawyer.
Yeah.
But Mr. Swastik told Malcolm Little, a nigger can't be a lawyer. Why don't you be a carpenter? And those words converted an 8th grade honor roll student to Detroit Red.
Yeah.
I could literally, my whole workshop could go from Malcolm Little to Detroit Red to Malcolm X to El-Hajj Malik El-Shabazz.
Mm-hmm.
Luke, it's sad to say this, I'm in the book publishing business.
Yeah.
Our best market are not the free people. Our best market are the inmates. The
Really?
rumor is, Luke, that you have to go to jail to learn how to read. You have to go to jail to appreciate reading books about Imhotep, about your history and your culture. But right now, we can't satisfy these inmates. They write us all the time wanting more and more books. But how come they didn't write us when they were in 8th grade or 12th grade or before they went to jail? Why do you have to go to jail to appreciate and learn how to read?
Yeah. You know, I have to say that the example you gave of Malcolm Little saying that to his teacher, and the response is oftentimes a response that people get in very similar ways even today. My wife, she does her research on Black children and early childhood education, and she's completing a study right now where one of the children came to school with a t-shirt on that said future president, and the teacher saw the shirt and laughed and told the child that they were silly for having the shirt on. So we know that that same pattern still plays out to this day. And
exactly. And let me just quickly say that what we also found out, Luke, is that African-American children are more affected by the expectations of their teachers than any other group. So you could have a white teacher make a demoralizing statement to a white male, but because this white male lives in an affluent neighborhood with a father who's a professional, he's not as affected by the negative comments of the teacher than a Black male student who hears these derogatory comments coming from this white or Black teacher.
So is it that the white child has more protective factors against those negative messages?
Yes, and a stronger level of self-esteem. They're convinced, looking at the larger society, there's a role for them to play. That 44 of the 45 presidents look like him.
That's real. Well, again, thank you for joining us. Is there any parting words that you'd like to leave with those who may be watching this?
Well, I just want to quickly give some stats.
Okay.
African-American children are 17% of the children in public schools, but we're 41% of the children placed in special education. And if a Black child goes to special ed, 80% of the time it's going to be the male child. So we're 41% of special ed, but only 6% of gifted and talented in advanced placement. The second concern, we have to do something about this dropout rate. In many inner city school districts, the dropout rate is close to 50%. And Luke, they're not dropping out in 12th grade. They're dropping out in 9th grade. Can you imagine how it feels to be a 9th grader? You enter 9th grade at 16 years of age with a 4th grade reading and math school. That's embarrassing. So you can't wait until your 16th birthday to drop out. So we have to do something about special ed, the dropout rate, and the low expectations that are affecting our students.
Because ultimately, it's socializing them for one place.
And that's prison. And Luke, we didn't even have time to talk about fatherlessness, because in 1920, 90% of Black youth had their fathers in the home. In 1960, it was 80%. But in 2017, only 28% of Black youth have their fathers in the home. We could have a whole nother workshop on how we went from 90 to 80 to 28%.
The destruction of the Black family.
Exactly. And as you know, the change in the economy from agriculture to industrialization to the information age. So the economy changed, but our curriculum and our pedagogy has not changed. So it's as if we're still preparing Black youth to work in factories that are now in Mexico City and in South Korea.
That's a good point. Can I ask one more question?
Of course.
I wanted to bring it back a little bit to, you do a lot of work with churches as well.
Yeah, and I'm so glad to hear you talk about your church and the role it had on your life.
Oh, absolutely. And my faith is what guides me and what really pushes me to continue doing this work. Because as you know,
don't let me start preaching now. We can preach this if you want to.
Well, I was gonna say, you know, is there any? I mean, what led you to? I mean, in terms of from a religious perspective, into continuing to do this work for so many years?
Well, one of my books is titled "Adam, Where Are You?" Why most Black men don't go to church. And unfortunately, there are large numbers of churches where there's this white, blonde, blue-eyed, feminine image of Jesus Christ on the cross.
Yeah.
And many Black males are not going to respond to that church. When Herod was looking for Jesus, Joseph hid him in Egypt. You can't hide a white boy in Egypt. The Bible is clear in Daniel 7, verse 9, and in Revelation 1, 14 through 15. He had hair, the texture of wool, feet the color of bronze, came from the line of David. David was Hamitic people, Black people. So it's easy for me to be Afrocentric and Christocentric. My faith and my culture are reinforced one with the other.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. And thank you for joining us. At the end of every interview, we ask each individual to basically say the statement, Black Minds Matter because, and then fill it in with whatever you would like to say. So you can take a moment to think about it and then.
I'm ready.
Okay.
Black minds matter because we built the first civilization. We were the ones that built the pyramids, one of the 7 wonders of the world, 48 stories high, 755 feet wide, 2,300,000 stones, perfectly balanced, perfectly right angle. Black minds matter. The Greeks studied in Egypt, not the reverse. Egypt is the origin of civilization. Black minds matter.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.